Hello and welcome to Recovery Weekly, an interactive weekly program used to guide you, the family member of an individual with a substance abuse problem, through the process of recovery. I'm your host, Scott Kalane, joined as always by Ian Koch, licensed alcohol and drug counselor and internationally certified addiction specialist. Thanks for joining me, Ian.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning. I just want to let everyone know before we started the show that we do have a chat feature that allows for the interactive part of the show. And it's to the right of the screen, so at any given point, if you want to submit a question to us, feel free. And I'll field them as quickly as possible. Also, this is the internet and all, so if there are any kind of glitches between the connection or, any broken up speech, just know that we are recording this, so you can go back and check it out later on the blog section of northeastaddictionconsultants.com. All right, so Ian, we talked about last week just a little introduction about who you were and how you got into addiction treatment and all that. This week, I thought we'd focus on better understanding addiction as an illness itself. And I hear addiction referred to as a disease quite often. You'll hear it in the news, and some people think to themselves, "Well, how is it a disease? It doesn't actually make you, physically ill to the point where, unless you're dependent on a substance." How is it actually, what factors make it actually a disease?
It's a good question. You know, there's there's a lot known about addiction, but there's a lot that's not known about addiction. One of the things when I look at a disease, and I personally I don't call it a disease, I call it an illness.
Okay.
Maybe that's splitting hairs in my own mind, but I like that. Uh, the reason the reason I call it an illness, I guess, or a disease, would be because I see it having symptoms. And when the symptoms are treated and the symptoms aren't showing anymore, there's no more of an issue. Um, a lot of illness and disease can be genetic, which we know that addiction is to an extent. So I think that's where people get this disease model. Recently, there's a clip, I think it was CNN, did a little broadcast about the new DSM-5 coming out next year. And the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, right now it's in the fourth revision, which is it's an actual revised fourth edition, is where we get a lot of our billing criteria. We get a lot of our behavioral patterns to say things like, oh, that person has depression or anxiety or is alcoholic or a drug addict. The thing that the DSM does not take into account is the difference between dependence and abuse and actual addiction or alcoholism. And I do believe there's a difference. I don't believe that just because someone was diagnosed as alcohol dependent, that they are an actual alcoholic. I think there's some symptoms that a lot of people don't take into account, a lot of people don't look at. A lot of people are under the impression that abstinence is the answer, when I'm under the belief that once we've achieved abstinence, the real work needs to happen, because
Mm.
abstinence, let's face it, abstinence is the leading cause of relapse. It always will be. Sobriety is the absolute number one leading cause of relapse, and it always will be. So if all we're trying to do is remove the substance, right, substance dependence, get rid of the substance, you're no longer dependent on the substance, we've got a much bigger problem on our hands.
Absolutely. And now you mentioned that you thought that DSM actually says there's a difference between abuse and dependence. And is that, think of the sense of maybe a college student who's binge drinking every weekend. Now they wouldn't obviously be seen as dependent in every case. Some might be, but in the cases of the people that just binge drink and use on the weekends and get it out of their systems, and the rest of the week they're sober. What do you have to say about that in terms of
Typically, your weekend, the weekend warrior, Jenny goes out Thursday night with the girls, gets hammered, She goes out Friday night to the frat party, gets hammered. Saturday night, goes out to, the club or the dance and gets hammered. And then Sunday morning, she thinks to herself, whew, I got homework to do. And then she lays off the rest of the week, depending on the symptoms, I would consider that more, in a very generic form, I would consider that more substance abuse. However, if the difference between abuse and dependence is abuse is more of the weekend warrior, dependence is more a result of physical withdrawal and the amount you use to create the desired effect. So if every day I drink 3 drinks and I catch a buzz, well, 3 weeks go by and those 3 drinks don't cut it, so now I need 4 drinks a day. And then a week or 2 goes by and that doesn't cut it, so now I need 5 drinks a day. And then eventually when I don't drink, I start to suffer from withdrawal symptoms, maybe shaking, sweats, anxiety, increased blood pressure. That would be considered dependence because my body has physically become dependent on the substance. You hear of people getting the DTs, delirium tremens. Mm-hmm. Most people do not experience delirium tremens. They say they do, but they don't. 12% of people who actually detox from alcohol experience delirium tremens. The delirium tremens are hallucinations, auditory and visual, and it can be really, really nasty and scary to actually watch someone go through that.
But it doesn't actually have to get to that point of delirium tremens
for
it to be dependence, right?
Okay. No, absolutely not. And that's where there's all these different levels and stages, right? So what I heard is that the new DSM-5 has actually eliminated abuse and eliminated dependence. And what this news thing, and you watched it, I sent it over to you, and we talked about it. It's mentioned how 40% of college students are now alcoholic. That's another problem, right? Alcoholic, the word alcoholism.
It's becoming a very loose term, right?
Well, when it's not in the DSM.
Oh, okay.
Like that is a social word that we use. The word, it might be in the new version. I haven't read it. I haven't seen the criteria. So, someone may watch this video in a year and say, well, he was wrong, and I very well may be. I haven't seen the criteria exactly. But in the current DSM, it doesn't talk about alcoholism. It doesn't talk about being alcoholic. It doesn't talk about addiction. It talks about substance abuse, substance dependence, and then under substance abuse and substance dependence, there's different categories. Opiate abuse, opiate dependence, cocaine abuse, cocaine dependence, and then within those, there's also withdrawal. The DSM, the way it's set up, is that it diagnoses behavior, not people. So if I think my favorite diagnosis in the whole thing is pica. Pica is when you eat funny things. So if you call me up one day and say, I got this trouble, I can't stop eating my bed sheets. And you are actually eating your bed sheets, and you rip them in little pieces and you eat them, and you fantasize about eating the bed sheets. Little kids you see have typically with pica, they eat wood chips or will eat their Tonka truck wheels or whatever it may be.
I actually saw a whole show on this where the girl was addicted to eating rocks, and she, chipping her teeth away, and without, which just shows you the grips of addiction. She didn't want to stop, even though obviously her teeth were just falling out of her mouth at that point.
Exactly. And there was a family who. There was a huge lawsuit, I think like 10 years ago, where the child died from eating salt. He would eat tablespoons of salt and literally overdosed on salt. And the family, there was this huge controversial case where, the kid, what happened, or so the family said, is he snuck in, to the cabinet and got into the salt. They had to hide it and lock it away, and he got into it and died. So the DSM, right, it's describing a set of behaviors. Alcoholism, addiction, is beyond those behaviors, and it expands, right? You can, if you drink 2 drinks a day and if you drink 2 drinks a day for X amount of time, a year plus, we'll say, with some other things, you could qualify as alcohol dependent. So you call your insurance company and say, hey, I try to not drink these 2 drinks, but I really like these drinks and I can't stop. What do I do? And the insurance company says, well, you should probably go. It sounds like you're alcohol dependent. You should probably go to treatment. So little Jimmy stops drinking his Bloody Mary and his gin and tonic after work and goes to treatment. He fills out the stuff. Overall, there's what's called a GAF score. It's about your level of functioning in life, fairly high, except the alcohol brings it down a bit. They remove the alcohol. There's no longer a problem. He gets on with his life. He continues to function and thrive as a human being and as an adult. Doesn't mean he's alcoholic. When he was able to stop, he was able to stay stopped. Alcohol was the problem. He fixed the problem, or removed the problem, we should say.
Right.
He went on with his life. Right? You do see this fairly often. Being an alcoholic, right, or addiction, right, the illness that I talk about, and typically the illness that I treat, and the illness that the viewers of this program watch. And I also want to say we had a really good response to the last video, even though we had technical problems. Afterwards, throughout the week, a lot of people tuned in to watch the episode in the blog, so that was really good.
Great.
But the folks that we're talking to and we're dealing with, their kids are suffering from addiction and alcoholism, right? Abuse and dependence, you fix the problem is gone, right? If I have a flat tire in my car, I fix the flat tire.
Go
I don't
on
have a
your
flat tire
way.
anymore.
Yes, right.
I keep going. If it's the spare tire, I may have to drive a little slow for a period of time, right? Not go over 45 for a period of time until I can really fix it. But ultimately, when I fix it, it's done.
Right. But it's
recovery.
Right. I just want to say real quick, in the case of someone that is actually dependent on it, and not just abusing, wouldn't they be more apt to have some kind of deep-seated emotional bind that's holding them to whereas the person who can, drink throughout the week and just enjoys, a couple pops every night, and then, decides this probably isn't for my best interest if I want to stay healthy, be drinking every night, and they do it and they're able to just let it go without having like second thoughts. Yeah, that would be the person that's not classically an alcoholic, right? It's the person that is, taking into, drinks those 2 drinks every night and then decides I don't want to do this, it's not good for my health, and goes, why can't I stop doing this?
And yeah, I don't want to say that they are or are not alcoholic. What I prefer to do is present some information. I found it to be much more effective for people. I present that information, and that person decides, yes, that's me or that's not me. When we label people, when we diagnose people, there's lawsuits over diagnoses, right? When we label people as a certain way, it can A, follow them their whole life. B, it can act as a barrier for them getting help or treatment. C, just because they have that quote diagnosis doesn't mean they're going to get help. So it's not labeling the person specifically isn't as important as presenting information that they're going to understand, that they're going to be able to identify to, that their family is going to understand, that their family is going to be able to say, oh my God, that is my kid. That's more important than what are they?
Getting that label, right? I understand that.
However, the insurance companies are driven by the labels, and that's it. And that's where this industry is really starting to, I believe, fall apart, is because of this managed care. The treatment and this is the insanity. This is absolute insanity, is that your insurance company is going to determine what kind of level of care you can have. Now, they're never, you might call and talk to a different person every time you call, yet they get to determine what kind of help you need. That's why a lot of the treatment programs, are going into self-pay programs, because then people can get the help they need. A lot of insurance companies aren't covering programs. They say that you have to fail at certain levels of care before you can move up to better levels of care. Like there's the outpatient program, IOP, people call it, or PHP, partial hospitalization programs. Insurance companies will say, well, you have to try these and fail before you can do residential treatment. It's insane. That's not based on whether the person is alcoholic or not. That is based on a set of criteria out of the DSM, a piece of paper.
Wow. And you mentioned earlier in the show that you believe that genetics play a part in addiction. How big of an impact do you think it actually makes?
You know what? I don't know 100%. My experience tells me that if you take an addict or an alcoholic and not someone who's dependent, but an addict or an alcoholic, and you shake the family tree, addicts and alcoholics are going to pop out all over. I know there's some stuff with the brain chemistry, reward centers in the brain that trigger use. But that also can lead into dependence and abuse. In a couple weeks, we're having a woman on who knows, she does a lot of work with this kind of stuff. And I'd rather leave some of those questions for her because that's kind of her specialty.
Oh.
When we look at the reward centers in the brain and the pathways and things, drinking a couple drinks, let's face it, it feels good. You know, anyone who's like caught a buzz, not gotten sloppy drunk, but caught a buzz, it feels good. You know, you can't deny that. Smoking a little pot, for most people who smoke pot, feels good.
Right.
You know? But the difference is the addict and alcoholic can't control it.
And they don't they want that to be like their perpetual state too, in some cases? Where it's like they like to think that, why can't I feel this good all the time, you know? Whereas other people go, well, that was nice, I'm going to move on with my life, maybe do it a little later, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Do we have any questions up to this point? Or maybe we should talk about what the illness and symptoms actually look like.
Okay. We don't have any questions right at this moment, but yeah, let's get into that a little bit. Just maybe explain to me what drug and alcohol uses, what the use of drug and alcohol does to the changing of brain chemistry, or how people adapt to their new addictions, you know?
Well, it becomes a part of their life. Right? It becomes their new way of life. And because it is so profound on the body, and because it feels so good, it becomes the number one driving factor in their life. When I explain the illness, I kind of break it out into three pieces. It's not fact. It's not science. You know what I mean? There's no this, what I talk about and the way I explain it, it's not necessarily proven. Some pieces of it are proven. Some things you can cross-reference into the DSM, into studies on the brain. But it's not 100%. But the reason I explain it the way I explain it is because the past 6 years, I've been running groups in detoxes, in psych hospitals, for IOP programs. And if I got a group of 30 addicts and alcoholics in front of me, without fail, on a weekly basis, I've been running this group for 6 years, so you can do the math on how many groups that is, how many people that's been, without fail. If I have 30 people in that group, without fail, 29 on a bad, not a bad day, but on an off day, 28 of those people will identify to what I'm talking about. One or two might not. It's been fairly often when everyone in the group understands it. What I have found, and the reason I don't study the brain chemistry. Not that it's bad, not that I haven't read about it, written about it for school and things like that. And if I see an article, I won't read it. But the reason that's not where I concentrate my area of expertise is because I guarantee you, when Jimmy relapses, the last thing Jimmy's thinking about is the reward centers and his neurons and dopamine levels and serotonin in his brain. Jimmy's not, when Jimmy's sitting on the couch, Jimmy's thought isn't, wow, my dopamine levels are pretty low right now. I think I'm going to go, well, it's, 9:20 in the morning. I think I'm going to go get some cocaine. That's the last thing that he thinks, right? There is a treatment center up in Vermont used to play Father Martin's Chalk Talk. And there's a great program down in Maryland that Father Martin started. Great program. And I've often wondered if they play those videos. But they're kind of old videos, and it talks about all sorts of stuff. When these people relapse, they're probably not thinking, my experience tells me they're not thinking about what they saw on Father Martin's Chalk Talk.
That's a distant memory at that point, right?
Yes. If I worked at a program where they did something called the Step One, and it wasn't really what I interpret Step One to be, but it was a sharing of the war story. So the addict would write down kind of like all the bad things that they've done based on their drinking and using, and then they would sit in front of the room and they would share their war story. A lot of programs do it. If Benny is sharing his war story, and Jenny's going to relapse in a week, when Jenny relapses, Jenny never thinks about, oh my God, I shouldn't do this because Benny said in his story X, Y, and Z, so I'm not going to relapse. That inability to rationalize, to think appropriately, that's one of the leading pieces of the illness. So there's three pieces. You with me?
Yes.
Should I keep going? All right.
Let's go.
So there's three pieces, right? There's a physical piece, there's a mental piece, and then I call the third piece the emotional piece. A lot of the emotional piece we can throw in pieces of the DSM. There's parts of the physical piece we can bring in pieces of the DSM. There's part of the mental piece that we could probably link in some brain chemistry. But when I'm talking to the addict, that's not what I talk about, right? So I talk about the physical piece. And the physical piece is this compulsion to continue the use once they've started to use. There's actually my whole theory comes from one sentence, the only sentence that I've ever found in any of the 12-step literature that even alludes to something like this. It's in a chapter called The Doctor's Opinion in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's one sentence, and it says, they're restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can experience the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. I guess it's two sentences. Once they've succumbed to the desire again, as they always do, the phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. My whole theories are based off those two sentences. And then obviously the other stuff that is incorporated, through the DSM and that stuff.
What happens between point A and point B in those cases? Yeah, that's the real mystery.
Yes. And the interesting thing is that from counseling people and, working in programs and dealing with a lot of people in 12-step recovery who have attended 12-step recovery is that most of them have never even heard about that, don't know it's around, don't know, even if I would read that sentence, they don't really understand what that means. But basically what it explains is that there is this physical piece, and it's very observable. We can see it happening often, almost every time, that when the addict or alcoholic puts the substance into their body, they can't seem to stop. So all good intentions. They might be going out, we'll say there's a wedding, and Jimmy is going to the wedding with his family, and his family says, "Please, Jimmy, don't drink too much." Jimmy says, "No problem. I got this one. I'm under control." Up to that point, Jimmy has had no alcohol for that day. He's good to go. Jimmy gets to the wedding. He finds out, well, it's open bar. Well, Jimmy's got to have a drink. It's open bar. I mean, what alcoholic would turn down a free drink?
Right.
Not many. So Jimmy says, okay, I'm gonna have a drink, but I respect my family. I respect the people who are getting married. I'm not gonna drink too much. With all good intentions, I'm not gonna drink that too much. So Jimmy has a drink. Well, Jimmy has that drink and he begins to get thirsty. It's not like Jimmy has a glass of water on a hot summer day and his thirst is quenched. But Jimmy has that drink and he gets a little thirsty. And he thinks, I could maybe do one more. Maybe I could have one more drink. So he goes to the bar and he has one more drink. But that second drink was really good too. It went down real fast. It went down real smooth. And he thinks, man, we got a couple hours. We're still in the opening reception. They haven't even actually gotten married yet. We still got a wedding, then dinner, then the after party. Maybe one more. I can have one more. So Jimmy goes back to the bar and he's got his third drink. And about halfway through that third drink, Jimmy starts to think to himself, "There's no way I'm going to be able to not drink. I'm going to be here the rest of the day." So then Jimmy gets smart. Jimmy goes up to the bar with his half beer. He orders another beer. He finishes his half, drinks half of the other, and quickly walks away. So it still looks like Jimmy has half that drink. So that's the game Jimmy continues to do all night long, looking like he's only, he's nursing the same beer. Eventually, Jimmy is real drunk, hitting on pride, hitting on grandma's friend, that hitting on whoever that will pay attention. And that's the problem is Jimmy, with all good intentions, Jimmy went to that wedding to not drink too much. Or any for that. But once Jimmy started to drink, he couldn't stop. With heroin addicts, with cocaine addicts, female cocaine addicts or crack addicts often offer their bodies for sex so they can get money. It's one of the easiest ways they can get money because when they start, they can't stop. Heroin addicts, young heroin addicts, opiate addicts are often breaking into their families' places. Mom typically has to sleep with her pocketbook under her pillow. The families need to know where the credit cards are. I've counseled an unfortunate, extraordinary amount of families who their own children have sold their jewelry, have written bad checks, have forged checks, have stolen their credit cards over and over and over. All right, it is an unfortunate thing, but what happens is when the addict starts, they can't stop. It's not that they don't want to stop; it's that they can't stop. Right? And we talk about they're either powerless or they're not. But you can't be partially powerless. It's like walking on water. You either can or you can't. I've not met anyone who can.
Right.
That Moses could, or was it Jesus? One of the two I heard could.
Yikes.
But, yeah, yikes is true. but the truth is that you either can or you can't. You're either powerless or you're not. You either can stop or you can't. The assumption is that he would stop if he wanted to. But he can't, right? That physical compulsion has taken over everything he's done. Second part is the mental piece. The mental piece is when the addict gets sober, right? So the physical piece is after they've put the substance in their body. Let me go rewind to the physical piece. Physical piece is my coffee, my morning cup of coffee. I drink one, maybe two cups of coffee a day. If I drink that second cup, it's going to be later this afternoon. Why? Because if I make a fresh cup of coffee and set it on the table, it has no effect on my body. I might think to myself, yeah, I really would like that. That would really be good. But unless I put it in my body, I'm still going to be groggy and tired. When I put the coffee in my body, I wake up. I become alert. It helps get my day started. Americans, man, there's a lot of Americans who will say, "I haven't had my coffee yet."
Hmm.
You know, I don't know. I haven't.
America actually runs on Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah.
And that's the issue, right? Is when they put it in their body, it has an effect.
Hmm.
Now, if I put too much in my body, it will have a negative effect, which is that I clench my jaw. I get very anxious. So I have to be very careful of how much I put in my body. With drugs and alcohol, the addict or alcoholic, they can't determine that. One is good, two is better. Three is good, four is even better than that.
Hmm.
Five is fantastic. 500 is unbelievably good. You know,
So yeah.
four is better, right? And that's that physical piece. The mental piece is the second part. And this is where Nancy Reagan went wrong. Is Nancy Reagan had a great theory. I would love for her to
Oh,
watch this
great
video
there.
one day.
Yeah.
She had a great theory. Just say no. No matter what, say no. With no matter what, people could say no. Florida would not be the treatment capital of the world. If you do a quick Google search right now on Palm Beach, Palm Beach rehabs, you'll come up with at least 20 rehabs in one town. Not sober houses, rehabilitation centers. All right?
Hmm.
It is a business that tries desperately to treat this piece, but really struggles with it.
Well, I always had a question about concerning rehabs in nice, warm destinations such as Florida. Doesn't that completely take the addict out of their natural setting and then basically throw them right back into the fire when they go back? Like, if they get comfortable in this place that's unrealistic, where it's like this nice resort accommodations where, you are learning about treatment and helping yourself get better and healthier, but then again, it's not realistic to what the life you actually lead. Yeah.
Well, and now that's where the sober living programs have come in, and
Mm.
so people stay. It's like they do a forced geographic, they move
Oh,
people out
okay.
of town down there.
Hmm.
But yeah, going back to the same area that you came from almost never works. That's,
Okay.
it almost never works.
So yeah.
So the mental piece. The mental piece is that when the addict stops, they can't stay stopped. Just saying no is not an option. It's never going to be an option, right? When we're talking about an illness, we are talking about a fatal progressive illness. Uh, it continuously gets worse. It never gets better, even when the person is sober, abstinent, we'll say, right?
Hmm.
Just staying sober doesn't treat addiction or alcoholism. Staying sober doesn't keep people sober. The assumption is that if Jenny would just stop using, Jenny would be okay. If she would just stay sober, she would be okay.
And there's also not any pill or drug that you can take right just to stay sober. Right?
To stay sober, no.
Mm.
To get sober, there's all sorts of stuff, but
Mm. But like like an antidepressant that'll
yeah,
stop you from
no,
using. There's nothing like that, right?
no, the studies aren't that great. I mean, there's stuff that can help you get sober. There's a
Mm.
great program down in Georgia that does actually very good program, a detox program. They do a nutritional detox where instead of using medications, they use all sorts of different vitamins and nutrition it's really nice. Instead of when the person detoxes, pumping them filled with even more chemicals, that when they come out of detox, they feel so depleted. When they come out of this detox, they feel good because it
Oh,
gives them the nutrition they need, to kind of they to get back on their life. They start thinking quicker, their cognitive responses much faster. So, but the mental piece is that when someone stops, they can't stay stopped. The physical piece is when they start, they can't stop. Mental is when they stop, they can't stay stopped. Studies, statistics show statistics are not good. There's always a way to manipulate statistics. I'm not going to say that one way or another, but statistics basically show that 5% of the people who get sober, 6% of the people who get sober make it 5 years.
hmm.
6% make it 5 years. So if you have, I'm not a mathematician, but
Go ahead. I can
you
figure it out for you.
have people in the program,
30, you
what's
said?
that? Who are
Yeah.
going to make it 5 years?
Yeah. You're breaking up a little on the Skype side, but go ahead.
30, if 30 people get sober, how many are going to make it for 5 years? Two?
Oh, right. So that, yeah. Right. Maybe 2.5.
Half?
That half person, yeah.
For a half person.
Hmm.
Uh, if 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 it was as simple as staying sober, we would tell people not to use. Just don't do it and you'll be okay. Yet we also wouldn't have chronic relapsers. I mean, you tell some of these chronic relapses. There's programs out in Texas, fantastic program, one that specifically works with chronic relapsers. Chronic relapsers. In fact, they won't even take you unless you've been to 7 treatment programs.
Wow.
You tell those guys to just not use. They'll laugh at you.
Mm.
Not using is an option. And and this is also why you have professionals in the field who get sober, work in the field of addiction, why they relapse, right? Like we've talked about it. Like I'm in recovery myself, but just because I have like some fancy letters behind my name doesn't mean that's going to keep me sober.
Mm.
If I don't do what's necessary for my own recovery, I'm going to relapse just like everyone else. Like I'm not different. I'm not special. I'm not fancy. And as soon as I start to think I'm different, and this is where everyone struggles and everyone relapses. As soon as people think they're different, I've got this. I'm cool. I'm going to be okay now. I've been sober this long, so I'm surely going to stay sober. That's when they fall. It's an inability to think straight. It's an inability to rationalize. It's an inability. It's an inability to say no. So no matter what kind of education we give them at a treatment center, if we are forcing them into treatment and the treatment center doesn't focus on this type of model, and there are programs out there that do focus on this model's very similar, that person's going to relapse. Third reason, or third symptom, I should say, is this emotional piece. Now, some people would say, well, this is also mental. Yes, I guess maybe we could split hairs. I believe it's an emotional piece. It's a deeper piece.
Mm.
80% of addicts get diagnosed with depression, anxiety, right? Restlessness. Like I quoted that sentence in the beginning, restless, irritable, and discontent. I call it the grass is green syndrome. And to be quite honest, every human being walking the face of the earth suffers from this symptom. The grass is green. It's always better over there. If she was only prettier, if I only had more money, if we only had more viewers for the show,
Like
if
it's its own form of escapism, really, right? Where you're just
yeah,
trying to project yourself outside of your current situation. Okay.
thinking it's going to be better over there.
Mm.
And when we get over there, well, if this would just happen, if that would happen, one more, one more, one more, and that's that restlessness. See, long before, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before we got into Sigmund Freud and psychotherapy and hundreds of years before that. This stuff has been written about.
Hmm.
It's it's been written about it in Europe. It was noted in some categories as a false self, an ego self.
Hmm.
In other categories, in more of the Asian cultures, it was written as a state of samsara, suffering. This, regardless of what it looks like, it's this constant state of suffering that one more would be okay. If I just had that, I would feel better. My current situation isn't good enough, but when that happens, that'll be okay. Everybody's got this. Every single person walking the planet has this to some extent. To some extent. Some people have it real bad. Some people don't have it bad at all. Uh, that's the root of the problem. That's what needs to be treated. Abstinence, what happens is abstinence makes that worse. So it surfaces as anxiety and depression. The addicts and alcoholics that I present this information to, all of them get on meds at some point, or have tried it, or have thought about it. But the ones who get on meds, what happens is they take a dose, the dose isn't good enough, so they up the dose. Well, that's not good enough eventually, so they up the dose. Well, that's not good enough, so they add in this medication. That's good for a little while, but then eventually that wears off, so then they added another one. And it's this constant game of new meds, different meds. Let's try this, let's add this, let's increase the dose. Let's more. But it's never good enough because we're talking about something deeper, something much, much, much deeper than something that a pill can treat. Now, I'm not saying that depression and anxiety is not real and that certain medications can treat anxiety and depression. What I'm saying is this emotional piece is not anxiety and depression and just looks like it. It like wears a mask. It's deeper than that. It is this state of suffering deep within the body, deep within the soul, that causes the person to want something else and not to be satisfied with what they have.
Hmm.
When that dissatisfaction becomes so unbearable, the mind says, well, maybe I can have just one drink.
Hmm.
Maybe, opiates were my problem. I could probably smoke pot. Smoking pot's okay. Smoke a little weed, feeling pretty good, peace, love, man. And then all of a sudden, this feels good, but maybe I could just have one Percocet 30.
And this doesn't even
Or
have to be in the case of just like an absolute collapse, right? This could be a passing thought that catches hold of you, and right? And I
yeah,
know that's in my case. I know probably in yours, you're like, wow, I suddenly really desire a beer or to smoke some pot or whatever,
and
and
that
all
desire
consuming.
strong.
Mm.
It becomes so strong that you don't think about Father Martin's chalk talk before you take a drink.
Right.
The thought doesn't.
Oh.
There is an inability to think about that. And then the person, once they put that substance in their body, then they can't stop. And that cycle spins off again. The other alternative that happens when that person is sober is they feel so good.
Mm.
I feel great. Life's good. I just got a raise at work. My girlfriend is a model. I
Getting
drive
carried
a
away. Yeah.
well, everything's so good that maybe if I had a beer, it'd feel better. It's the same it's the same process, right?
Mm.
But
Right.
it's an inflated process where the first one I explained, it's that it's, oh, life's terrible, it's so unbearable to be sober, that maybe if I was over on the grass over there, it would feel better, right? Then they get on the grass, the substance cycle begins. It's the exact same thing. Life
Mm.
is so good that maybe if I was on the grass over there, it would be just a little bit better. Maybe, well, it's just Coors Light. Barely even has alcohol in it. Maybe one Coors Light. I worked hard. I deserved it. I haven't had a drink in X amount of time. And then they have that one Coors Light, and then they sneak outside for the second Coors Light,
Mm.
and they manage to put it down that night. But then that's nagging. Well, you
Mm.
had to. Okay. See, you just had one Percocet 30 and got away with it. You're not dope sick. There's no problem. you're not even an addict. That's what the mind is telling itself, right?
Mm,
You don't even have a problem. 30 days of treatment doesn't treat that.
no.
30 days in treatment, in good treatment, 30 days in good treatment will give people the education of what they need to do to stay sober. Whether they become willing to do that or not is a whole nother story. So what our work at Northeast Addiction Consultants, what we do is we help families, we teach families how to generate that willingness or the willingness in their son, daughter, family member, loved one, whatever. We teach them how to generate that willingness where being sober is the only option. It has to stay the only option. Because just because that's the only option, it still doesn't mean that person's going to stay sober. They need to have the willingness to continue to move forward.
Right. And in that case, we're going to be wrapping up now. Next week, you can tune in and listen to Carintha Haberstro.
National competition.
1 second here, I need to
Really?
turn this thing off. Okay. Haberstro, she is from Penny's Place. She's the director of Penny's Place in Portland, Maine, which is a female sober living facility. We're going to have her on next week to discuss some things about addiction and treatment. But I would like to thank everyone for tuning in today. And you can join us again next week at 9 a.m. on northeastaddictionconsultants.com at the bottom of the homepage. Hope the best for you and your loved ones in this process of recovery. Goodbye.